the deal?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to the 2020 National Art Education Association Women's Caucus Awards and Program. And of course, this year we're online, unfortunately, but we'll make the best of it. I, I wanted to tell you again what Carrisa said. I got messages from Manisha and Gloria that they weren't coming, and I'll tell you what they said. Gloria sent a little message just saying, I hope that everybody's safe and well during these troubling and uncertain times. It is with heavy heart that I will inform you that I am unable to present during the award ceremony tomorrow because we're having family health issues and it's taking quite a toll.
Mm.
She said, I am truly honored to have been selected the recipient of the award and look forward to connecting in the future. So I sent her our condolences. And Gloria, and then Manisha also sent a message that he has an administrative meeting at the U of A today, right? Still have to work. She did not send her introduction. No, it was a little too late. But I'm glad Carrisa got it. So that's going to be wonderful. And since the Kathy Awards, Connors Award is first, um, it's wonderful for Carrisa to to give us that as well. I just want to say that I went to school with Kathy Connors at Penn State, and she was really a dear friend, and she would be very honored to have you receive her award, Carrisa.
Oh,
So I think
nice.
Thank you.
your introducer, Lisa, has a lot to say about your.
I do pages full here, highlighted. I'm so ready.
You have a little more time, remember? So you can go for 5 minutes.
Okay, all right, I can do that.
Good way, Lisa.
I can do it. So I'm so honored to start this this afternoon, and I really want to thank all of the members of the Women's Caucus for continuing with these awards, and especially during these challenging times. And so it's really wonderful to have this afternoon of joy to really celebrate these amazing artists, educators, people, and I'm excited to start it off today. So I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Carrisa DiCindio. I had the great pleasure of working with Carrisa when I was at the University of Arizona in Tucson, and it's there that I got to see firsthand the amazing kind of educator and scholar and all-around wonderful person and friend Carrisa is. A little bit of background about her is she got her PhD at the University of Georgia, and she did her master's degree there in art history, but she's originally from Pennsylvania, and she got her BFA at Kutztown University in painting, and has since kind of located in different areas and now in Tucson. She's a longtime educator. So before joining us, or not us anymore, but at that point us at the University of Arizona, Carrisa was the curator of education at the Georgia Museum of Art, and she did that for 7 years. She focused on public and academic programming. And then 5 years before that, she was the associate curator of education. So 12 years at the Georgia Museum of Art. She's also a published author, and she's published book chapters, peer-reviewed journal articles in journals such as the Journal of Museum Education, Art Education, the International Journal of Lifelong Learning and Art Education, and many contributing entries to many museum catalogs. We'll hear a little bit about some of her projects that she's working on with students a little bit later in Carissa's presentation, such as Stay Gold. But I also wanted you to know she's working in many capacities at the University of Arizona, and she's working on a really terrific program with Dr. Yumi how do you say Yumi's last name, Shira?
Shirai.
Yumi Shirai. She's an assistant professor of family and community medicine and the director of artworks. And she was an invited speaker and worked with the artists there about creating art exhibitions through the shared experiences of grief, adults with intellectual and developmental disability and university students. So Carrisa does a lot of work with her students within her classes and then with the Tucson community as well. So before being awarded this prestigious teaching award, she's also been other award winners, an award winner through the National Art Education Association. She was the Southeastern Region Arts Museum Educator of the Year in 2011 from NAEA. And in 2009, she was the Georgia Art Education Educator of the Year, and that's from the Georgia Art Education Association. It's fun to be able to brag about Carrisa because she's very humble. And she will probably not be a braggart in her presentation, but talk about her work and her amazing students. But it really, I want you to know, she really is humble and down to earth as she is. She's extremely, she's so deserving of this award and all of the awards that, and honors that come to her. So I want to read a couple of the comments from the two students that supported Carissa's nomination for this teaching award. And also we had an administrator letter from Dr. Ryan Shin and a colleague letter from Dr. Manisha Sharma, which were really exemplary. First person I want to start with is Devin Marin. So she writes, in the classes I've taken with Dr. DiCindio so far, she has provided a secure learning environment with innovative and adaptive skill set that consistently proves her teaching abilities. She presents her students with opportunities that have a lasting impact both in and outside of the classroom, and she's adept at maintaining engagement regardless of her audience. The impact she has on those around her is astounding, and I would consider her to be one of my biggest role models in influence in my emerging career. I can think of no one more deserving of this wonderful award. And then Eli Burke, who some of you may know, works with Amy Cray on the Art Education Journal. Eli and I have worked together on some, we were supposed to present at NAEA, but that didn't happen this year. Eli is currently a doctoral student at the University of Arizona, but also the Museum Education Director at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Tucson. And so this is what Eli, some of the points that Eli makes. In my first class with Dr. DiCindio, we co-created a museum program that was tailored to the intergenerational LGBTQI+ community. I have never had such a positive and dedicated ally by my side in working with my community. When I questioned myself, she reassured me. When I needed to talk, she listened without judgment. She is sensitive to the needs of her students and goes above and beyond to show up for those who need extra support. Her empathy for her students is something I deeply admire. In my role as the education director at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Tucson, I had the pleasure of providing tours of our exhibitions for Dr. DiCindio students. In these moments, I have continued to witness her dedication to not only the learning environment, but also making sure the content of her courses reflect the students and the communities she serves. And Eli ends with this. Dr. DiCindio is truly dedicated to her profession and the community. She is serious and extremely hardworking, yet adds levity to many situations when needed. Having a strength of character unparalleled amongst other professionals in this field. It is no surprise to me that she has been nominated for this award, and I cannot think of a more deserving individual. Carrisa, I know you're blushing, and I know it's sometimes hard to hear all of these things, but that's just excerpts from those letters. And really, these are representative of the students who didn't even write letters, who I personally know have really benefited by knowing you. And I just feel so honored to have had you as such an important colleague and friend. So in closing, I am honored to know you. I'm honored to know Carrisa as someone who's such an amazing teacher, such an amazing scholar, and she has such a good sense of humor. And she's so down to earth. And I think that being able to have that kind of reciprocal relationship with the students with whom you work, the community, with your colleagues, while being a scholar in the field and an artist is just not an easy task. And I think that Carrisa has done those things so splendidly. I want to thank all of her, the people who supported her nomination and the committee. And thank you so much for recognizing Dr. Carrisa DiCindio in teaching excellence with this really important Kathy Connors Teaching Award. So Carrisa, really excited to hear what you have to say, and congratulations on your award. I'm so honored to have nominated you. Yay.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Yeah, I missed you.
I'm like speechless now. I don't know how to talk. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen and get it together. It says, host disabled attendees. Okay. Well, first of all, I would like to thank Lisa for nominating me and for being Lisa. She's just my mentor and my friend, and I miss her so much. And when I get chances to see her and remember how amazing she is, I just appreciate it so much. I'd also like to thank the students and the colleagues that wrote letters of support for me. Not being nominated for this award was just a highlight, and I just am so appreciative of all of this. I'm honored to receive this award in memory of Kathy Connors, who I've been able to learn more about in this process, and she was an amazing educator in person, and it just makes this award even more meaningful. And then I'd like to thank the members of the Women's Caucus for this award and for all of the wonderful and important work that you all are doing. It's been a crazy few weeks, and I am very thankful to be able to connect with you all today, even if it's in a different format than we planned. And I'd like to thank my family who are being quiet while I'm talking to you all today. We'll see how long that's able to continue, but they also inspire me very much. My husband is a teacher as well, and he's the first person I bounce ideas off of, and I bounce a lot of ideas. I included this picture to begin with, partly because there's a cute baby in the front, but also because being on the floor in an art museum is one of my favorite things to do. I like getting comfortable in gallery spaces. This was a program I used to do at the Georgia Museum of Art called Toddler Tuesday. And the blazer is reminding me that it was also election day that day. I had my blazer on for it, so it's a bittersweet memory. So I wanted to start with just a little bit about myself. I grew up outside of Philadelphia, about an hour outside of Philadelphia. And I just always art was just always a part of what I did. I liked drawing all the time. One of my mom's favorite memories of me was in kindergarten. The kindergarten teacher would give me coloring sheets, and I would just draw a line through it and say I was done. And the teacher was worried that I didn't know how to color. And my mom said, no, she just wants plain paper to draw. Just give her paper and let her draw. And so I think that was probably my only act of rebellion, but it was something. I went to Kutztown University for art education. And after a few semesters there, I just fell in love with painting. And so I switched to become a painting major, and just really had a wonderful experience there. I have never been to Penn State somehow. And so I've never been, you all were talking about the creamery, and I've heard about this because I have lots of cousins who go to Penn State and they talk about it a lot. So at some point I need to get to that creamery. Um, so I ended up at Kutztown, and while I was at Kutztown, I went with the University of Georgia to Cortona, Italy. One of my professors, my painting professors at Kutztown, had been a visiting artist in Cortona and always talked about it. And so this first picture of me looking very young was actually in Italy, and I really fell in love with Italy and with Renaissance art. And so when I was looking at grad schools, I decided to go to a different area of the country for a couple of years and go to Athens, Georgia, and major in art history. And so my thesis was about Fra Angelico's Tempio Lamentation, which is really interesting history. But I also started working at the Georgia Museum of Art while I was there, which is the middle picture with some of my art educator colleagues. And so while I was at the University of Georgia and at the Georgia Museum of Art, I focused on community programs for 8 years, and then university and public programs for the other 6 years. I pretty much started at the museum and said, this is what I want to do with my life. This is it. I'm not leaving. I will stay here. And I did for a very long time. I ended up getting my PhD, as Lisa said, in art education. And so then I started teaching, I started advising grad students, and I just decided that that I really was kind of moving in a different direction. The University of Arizona position came up. I had never been to the Southwest before. I had never been to Tucson, but I immediately saw how wonderful it was. And so this is my third year at the University of Arizona, and you'll see from this talk that I really love it very much, especially the colleagues and the students here. So that last picture is my very first day at University of Arizona. I did a selfie to commemorate my first day. So in considering what I would say during this talk, I thought I would talk about what I learned from my teachers and some of the qualities that I admire most. I am going to do this by sharing some stories that reflect these qualities, and just sharing a little bit about myself too. So the first one is just an openness to messiness and play. I was a student who cared about grades, especially when I got to college. I was really very worried that my parents were spending money on me and that I would not be able to live up to what they were spending on me, which sounds silly now, but at the time this was a stress of mine. And so I really worked hard. Not that I didn't in high school, but it was just a different level. And so I started just really getting stressed out about these things. And I found that my favorite teachers really let me just breathe. You know, they didn't take everything so seriously. They let me experiment, and I really had to figure out how to let go of that fear of failure, and put myself out there as I went through higher education. And so I don't think I could have done that without the support of my professors at UGA. Carol Henry, Richard Sigismund, Tracy Costantino, they were just so supportive and created such a supportive environment. And they challenged me. They really kind of pushed me to go further than maybe I was originally comfortable, and think about ideas in different ways. And so that's something that I really cared about when I started teaching. But also I've noticed with the students in my class, they're just willing to be messy and experiment. And so we work on big open-ended projects. Lisa talked about Stay Gold, which is an intergenerational program for LGBTQ youth and elders. And it actually started in my graduate class, my first semester, when we were collaborating with the University of Arizona Museum of Art. Eli Burke, who had written one of my letters, he was in the class and also doing an assistantship at the museum. And so we developed this program, and it continues. But it was so messy at first, and we didn't know what it was going to look like. And yet all of the students were just in it and willing to be a part of that. The other things that I do, I ask my students to give tours with different groups of students at U of A, with middle schoolers sometimes, with adults at Artworks with developmental and intellectual disabilities. And they really dive into these challenges in a way that I just appreciate so much. They're very much willing to play along. Humor is the second quality that is really important to me. My family always has a joke to make, which is really wonderful most of the time. The old pictures of my dad making me laugh, and the other pictures of my son also making me laugh. I think my son could identify sarcasm at a very early age, and I don't know that that's a good thing, but there's always some laughter around my house, and I think that adds a levity to classes and to projects when things don't go as planned, and it's not the end of the world. So, you know, all of those stresses that I feel like that I had in higher education, I really try that to not bring that anymore. And so when my students are giving tours and I don't know if something's going to work out, or they want to try an idea and I'm just not sure, I really try to just let them do it and give them the space and the room to try. I feel this way at the University of Arizona a lot. My colleagues have a really wonderful, positive energy. And I always immediately from the start felt like I was a part of a team and like this was where I belonged. Even though Lisa's on the other side of the country now, she is a mentor and she checks in and supports me and continues to crack me up, even through a text message. And I just really appreciate that so much. The third is sparking imagination through exploration and discovery. Like I said, I grew up outside of Philadelphia, in a small town in Berks County. And Harry Bertoya, who was a modernist artist, he lived there, and he had passed away, you know, long before I knew of his work, but his family still lives nearby. And so one of my favorite memories of being in school was an art teacher who set up a way for us to go to his home and play his musical sculptures in his barn. And so that's what the first picture is, with the big gong on it. And it was just such a wonderful experience to walk around there. I think there were 8 of us, and we just were able to touch all of these sculptures and play this music. And it made me fall in love with art in a different way, because I loved making art, but this was an experience with art. And that's something that I really carried with myself. The second picture is of me at Howard Finster's Paradise Garden in Georgia, which I had always wanted to go to. I've got my blazer on again because I really like that blazer. But I had a chance to go and speak there right before I left Georgia, and I really just love the experience so much for the same reason. He had created an environment with recycled materials. He was a retired minister, and he used to bring people there to talk about God, and he would put his messages that he would hear from God on his art, and just covered surfaces in this space. And so it was such a wonderful exploration. And so I try to bring this into what we're doing in our museum too, in our practices. Gallery teaching is a lot of sharing and sharing resources and sharing ideas, and trying out ideas. And so in the museum, we really try to make sure there's time that we're all exploring together, that we're exploring the space, that we're exploring the works of art together, that we're bringing our ideas together. And I really do very much appreciate the fact that the students here too are just willing to do that. We ask them to be a part of this all the time, to be a part of these explorations with us. And so I think this is where it can be very, very magical. And one other experience that I had that I really loved before I left Georgia was an exhibition that I was the co-curator for with Tricia Miller, who's the head registrar at the Georgia Museum of Art. We did an exhibition called Tools of the Trade. It was a time in the galleries where they did not have anything scheduled. We had no budget, so we just brought things out from behind the scenes and let people explore with materials. And so you can see the Pop This, that was just a wall of bubble wrap that kids could go and pop. We set it up so that kids could be their own sculptures, that they could create their cell phone or their parent's cell phone. But it was really to just add some transparency to what happens in museums behind the scenes, and then also to give everybody the chance to just try things out and touch and explore. So I really love doing this, because to me this is what art museums should do, and I think a lot of museums are doing. The Georgia Museum of Art sometimes was a little bit more traditional, and so these hands-on experiences weren't happening so much. So it was really satisfying to get to put them all into the exhibition. And then the last one is compassion and kindness. I lost family members, friends, and pets while I was in school. I had a baby in the middle of my dissertation study, and he came 5 weeks early, so he was very unexpected. For a semester, the color green was not my friend, and I was taking a plein air class. So all of these things popped up during semesters, and I a lot of times, you know, like most students, felt overwhelmed and defeated and insecure. And when I think about the people who were around me and who are around me now, even as, you know, I'm in a new field for me, I think about the care and compassion that they show during the times when I did not feel my best. And it really sticks out to me. I can remember professors at Kutztown who really stepped up when I really needed that. And the generosity of their time and attention and spirit is really what I hold close as I continue teaching. My students are amazing. They're kind. They're wonderful human beings. And if they feel supported in their educational journey, I feel good about the work I'm doing. I'm beyond grateful for the colleagues and students I work with. I get to see great teachers every day around me in art and visual culture education program at the University of Arizona, and the talented museum educators who are just working their butts off to make museums accessible and inclusive in Tucson. I saw it too with the colleagues and students at the Georgia Museum of Art and at the University of Georgia, who are really some of the most creative, innovative and caring museum educators I've ever known. I'm so fortunate to get to work in an environment where I get to work with wonderful people who continue to inspire me and who share ideas, laughter, and support with one another. So thank you so much for being a part of this talk with me today. And I hope that next time we get to see each other in person. Thank you.
Yeah.
Introduce Wanda, of course, because I went to Penn State. I know Wanda for so many years. I just love her. And Karen, of course, is going to nominate. She's going to tell us about what she wrote about. So I think it's our pleasure now to hear what these amazing gals have to say. So take it away, Karen.
Well, there is only one Dr. Wanda B. Knight. It is with great admiration, Wanda, that great admiration for your leadership towards social justice that I nominated you for the NAEA Women's Caucus June King McFee Award. For more than 3 decades, Dr. Knight has contributed to the profession in many ways toward equity, diversity, and inclusion, all of critical importance to June King McFee. I have had the privilege to know Wanda for close to 2 of those decades, not only as my colleague at Penn State, but as a dear friend whose integrity and care for others never wavers. We've also had wonderful travels throughout the world together, presenting at some of the same conferences, and then a couple occasions being able to join me where I had Fulbrights and where I was living. So Wanda is so much fun to be with, and the joy and laughter that comes from our adventures contribute to my good health, I'm sure. And here Wanda is, it seemed to us at the time, close to the only Black person that we saw in Graz, Austria. There we go. Dr. Knight was elected to serve as president of the United States, Society for Education Through Art. Wish you were president of the United States of America. At both the national and state levels, Dr. Knight was appointed as chair of the Committee on Multi-Ethnic Concerns. When she taught in Michigan, she served as the Region 6 liaison officer, and that was in 90 to 93, for the Michigan Art Education Association. And I don't know if she'll cover, but she's lived in many places in and outside of the country, many states. She was selected for a Leadership Center County class of 2014 based on her record of leadership in the arts. And that's really a prestigious appointment there. Her critical yet compassionate feedback provides mentorship for all who have had the benefit of her feedback, and there have been many, and I'm one of those fortunate ones to have received that. Let's see. Here we go. Dr. Knight has integrated her research, teaching, and service with a strong focus on culturally responsive teaching and social justice art education. She brings people together to work towards social justice change. It's not a journey by oneself, and that is one of the beautiful attributes. You may see Kevin Jenkins in the image, and me as well, and Scott, forgotten Scott's last name, but in this photograph here. Okay, let's go to the next one. Yes, let's see. Dr. Knight's research on diversity issues and educational equity has been published widely, garnered awards, and brought forth invitations at keynote speakers at universities and conferences, and sometimes brings her into situations like this where she's sitting at a bus stop with the poster by her side. She has produced more than 35 scholarly publications, probably more than that by now. Additionally, she has presented her research at more than 100 state, national, and international venues. A few images on Graz, one at State College before filming, and I believe this is receiving the Pennsylvania Art Education, Higher Education Award. I think that's that photograph there. Well, she also ends up on Second Life. And Dr. Knight has actively initiated, supported, and participated in higher education equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives at Penn State. She was selected to serve as a 2014-15 Administrative Fellow to Executive Vice President and Provost at Penn State. That was a whole year appointment. In 2011, Dr. Knight was invited to serve as chair of the Educational Programming Committee of the Athletic Council for Diversity and Inclusion. As you know, that was desperately needed at Penn State and at all universities, but thank you, Wanda, for that. From 2007 and 2008, she served as the chair of Penn State's Commission on Racial and Ethnic Diversity, and the acronym for that is CORE-ED. Dr. Knight was instrumental in founding CORE-ED's annual symposium, which concerns promotion and tenure issues specific to underrepresented faculty members. Such an important role that you have played for many, many people. Again, thank you, Wanda. She has exemplified cultural diversity leadership in the classroom, among her peers, and within the field at large. It is through her dedication to leadership that Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Task Force was conceptualized and realized, and she will continue to lead in serving in the elected position on the newly formed ED&I, or Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Commission. You'll see Deborah Reeve, former president, former executive director of the NAEA Caucus, and this photograph is from Boston in last NAEA conference 2019. And then there's a picture of Wanda with Vinny Anaka-Zibwe, and we had met at a conference in Florida and ended up planning and scheduling a meeting at the Butterfly Pavilion. And that's where we really got to know Vinny, who Wanda and I then invited her to Penn State before she went back to Uganda. A lot of networking. Wanda is a magnificent person, exuding goodwill and kindness to all. You can see that magnet there in the photograph. Our friend in the photograph, Evelyn Sturmis, is a new media artist in Austria, and she introduced Wanda and me to Grotto, a tiny island in northeast Italy surrounded by the Adriatic Sea. And this was a few-hour train ride where I was living and teaching in Austria, and where Wanda came to visit and give an incredibly eye-opening presentation to different presentations to both of my classes at the University of Klagenfurt in Austria. And this is a photograph from Finland when she came there. I love this photograph. In the support letters for my nomination of Wanda, Enid Zimmerman states, through her passions and activism, Dr. Knight has developed, written about, and put into action her dedication to these issues around racism, feminism, and social justice art education. She also serves as guide, and she puts in parentheses, consultant for the NAEA School for Art Leaders Program that meets for 5 days each summer. The program provides transformative experiences for art educators to become leaders and advocates for positive change in the field of art education by developing their advocacy and leadership skills. Enid continues, I am also a guide for this program, and this past summer, Enid says, she had the opportunity to spend quality time with Dr. Knight. Although Enid knew Dr. Knight for many years, she said she was inspired by her insights about needed reforms in art education so that equity, diversity, and inclusion are not just words, but become important concepts for change in art education so that all students and art educators in a variety of art education environments can be impacted positively and treated equitably. Enid continues to say that June King McFee challenged white middle-class art educators to be aware of their biases and enhance equity for all students by supporting activism for art education through community engagement. Wanda Knight has been an advocate for these same challenges, and she would be a most worthy recipient of this award named in honor of Dr. McFee. Alex Wexler, who is with us today, and Enid would be as well. She had a conflict with another Zoom meeting, and we joked by email that it's very similar to actually being in the conference with all these overlaps. So we're still having those. But let's go to Alice Wexler in her letter of support. She describes Dr. Knight as one of the most effective scholars and educators in art education, in the art education field. She is an outstanding leader in addressing racist and gendered violence, bringing the needed awareness of institutional marginalization of non-white educators into the predominantly white field of art education. Recently, Dr. Knight made an important contribution to Bridging Communities Through Socially Engaged Art, edited by Alice Wexler and Vida Sabagui, published by Routledge in 2019. In her chapter, titled Bridging Racial Divides Through Interracial Dialogue in Art/Education, One More River to Cross, she writes, so Wanda writes, that we are, quote, drowning in silence, end quote, as race is the, quote, great taboo in our society, end quote. In this chapter, Alice describes that Wanda focuses on the US educational system and its impact on teaching and human relations. The only way out, Wanda writes, is to engage in interracial dialogue. Dr. Knight has become an extremely important voice in the field as we find our way out of institutional racism in our education and in our society. Flavia Basto writes, Dr. Knight boldly positions her research focus on issues of diversity and inclusion in teacher education and affirms that her interest springs from the inheritance of, quote, 3 significant entangled realities that are assessed negatively by the larger society: being Black, being a woman, and being from a lower social class, into quotes. Dr. Knight, and this is Flavia's words, embraces the connotations of her name, Knight, to battle institutional racism, seeking pedagogical opportunities to, quote, deconstruct, this is Wanda's quote, to deconstruct the long-held narrative of Black racial inferiority, end of quote. Flavia continues, this work is timely and relevant in today's national context of rising intolerance and hate. Dovetailing feminist and critical race theory standpoints to recognize barriers to the fulfillment of art education's transformative potential, Wanda Knight's scholarship and her active engagement in the profession poke at difficult questions while sustaining a sense of hope. Flavia says she considers Dr. Knight has been a trailblazer in the field of art education, developing a reputation as an activist researcher and leader whose contributions will have a lingering impact. Flavia continues, as an immigrant scholar, talking about herself, whose art education work has been focused on issues of social justice, Flavia finds Dr. Knight not only a kindred spirit, but an inspiration. Her work seeks to unpack the contradictions of the field of art education through examination of related themes, such as diversity and inclusion, racist imagery in the curriculum, social justice, culturally responsive teaching, and transformation. Pursuing these threads with energy and purpose has resulted in a robust scholarly output. Wanda B. Knight, the 2020 June King McFee Awardee.
Wow, 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 wow. Thank you so much, everybody. I guess if I hadn't heard all of that, well, am I speechless? But I just to understand and hear colleagues speak so highly of a person who feels so humbled and so honored to be in such a position. First and foremost, I want to thank my creator. And I also want to thank Keifer-Boyd for being the nominator, and for those beautiful people, Flavia, Alice, Enid, Alice, who's here today, for saying such kind and positive things. And again, to the selection committee, I'm most appreciative. One of the things that, for me, I may be the only scholar, Black person that has received this award. And if that is the case, which I believe it to be so, then I stand on those shoulders of other leaders and other people that have come before me, perhaps were even more deserving, and yet they may not have received it. So I receive it on their behalf. And no doubt there'll be others. So I'm happy to be a trailblazer, but if one is trailing, somehow blazing trails, then that means that there are not enough people out there whacking down those weeds to get through to where we need to be. So with that said, I'm going to say this: passion for equity and social justice does fuel my teaching, my research, and my service, and my professional leadership and community service as an art educator. Again, it's an honor to be the recipient of the National Art Education Association's Women's Caucus June King McFee Award, which builds upon and extends Dr. King McFee's legacy. And again, and her work toward creating more just societies and communities through art education. So Karen is going to be running my slides for me. And I thought it was most appropriate to have Dr. King McFee beside me, knowing that she would be here, and she is here. And to carry her name forward, given the work she did in times when it wasn't, as one of my educator colleagues told me years ago when I started on this venture, your work is not sexy. Well, I didn't want my work to be sexy. I wanted it to be impactful and to make a difference. And no doubt, Dr. June King McFee probably felt very similar in terms of the paths that she took as well. So I want to think about art educators embracing the challenge and opportunity of social change. And we look at our world, it is in dire need of social change, and in a positive way, because it is changing, but to me, it's in a way that we might not want to see where the outcome leads us. So with that said, I'm going to be today asking a question. What does social justice, I see myself as a social justice warrior, by the way, and I wonder what it has in common with the butterfly. And if we start and look at the next slide, and Dr. Kevin Jenkins was instrumental in sharing, making this image for me. For those of you who know what Black Panther is, it's a movie, and Wakanda as Wanda, my name got changed in 2018 when I received the Meryl Fletcher DeYoung Award to Wakanda. So I embrace that because I see myself as a social justice warrior. So with that said, again, so my journey has been transformative. And that is in the sense that I am not the same individual that I was prior to starting this journey. My vantage point is quite different. So I really think it's appropriate that I use the butterfly as a metaphor to frame my transformation as an art educator, as a leader, as one who stands up for social justice. And I'll look at these in terms of encapsulation, consumption, reflection, and transformation. So I'd like to move to the next slide, please. So when I think about the encapsulation stage, for me, it was a time in which that we each have these experiences that are unique to us. I grew up, I didn't know about the world from a global perspective like I do now. But of course, I didn't really know what I didn't know. I had not moved beyond my own encapsulated world. I grew up in rural North Carolina, as most of you know, because I talk about my heritage, not in a negative way, but also because that's who I am. And I take pride in growing up and sharing these stories. And I have nothing to be embarrassed about. I grew up in the Deep South in Reesville, North Carolina. I never had an art education course. I never visited a museum until I went to college. My parents' father was functionally illiterate, mother, high school dropout. And yet this work came to me. I didn't seek it. I don't know that I even wanted it because I didn't know, I wasn't looking for it. So let's learn a little bit about me, and I want you to introduce you to some of the people in my life and in my world that have been instrumental in change. So the next slide, and this comes from the deep, deep archives of Wanda Knight's records. That's my mother in the middle, and I don't know how many years. I must have been about, and I'm to your left, and to my right side is my little sister, Linda. And we'll see us as we grow up a little bit older. But my mother, that's an image, and somebody must have taken it from one of those little cameras or whatever, but I was able to find it. And during these times, this is not ideal because I had pictures of me at 6 months old and other stages of development, but I had to come up with what was available given this time of isolation and not being able to travel freely. So the next picture is a picture of my father, Major. I think I call these in his days, in African American culture, in some spaces, at least in North Carolina, those called his diddy bop days, where he would just kind of, he was young and carefree and probably on the block after different women. And the next slide is of my mother, no doubt, who he ended up capturing her attention or vice versa. And then if the next picture is of them together, both in their older years. Neither parent is with us in the way that we live today. They've transitioned, and yet I honor them and respect all that they did to guide me along this journey. My next slide is of my sisters. I have 3 sisters. I'm to the right, the little bit taller one, and to the left is my older sister, Ida. Linda, the one that was in the picture just below her, my baby sister, and to the right, Edna, which is my sister we're 15 months apart. In the next slide, you'll see us together as a family, and many years ago. And then the next slide, you'll see my grandmother and grandfather. Grandfather, my father's side, Tolly Bridges, and we called it kind of like they lived in the inner city of Reedsville, which doesn't even have 20,000 people, but it was considered the inner city because we lived on a big farm in the country where we didn't have running water. So that was the city. And my grandmother, that's why I love Alice so much too. Her name was Alice as well. So my grandmother Alice on my father's side. And then the next slide is my grandmother Mary Sue, who is my mother's mother, and very gentle, kind, spirited person. We lived on that big farm with my grandmother. I keep thinking it's around 300 acres. I could be wrong, but there was everything. We lived off the land. So they were the owners of this land. Unlike the inner city grandparents, that's what they call them. We had a different kind of experience. Next, you'll see my grandfather, Joe Neal. And grandfather Joe Neal, I guarantee this is why I have this social justice warrior spirit in me now, because of he was some type of a warrior. He was afraid of nothing and no one. And I just remember his spirit of hard work and work ethic, brilliant. People go to school now to be agriculturalists and learn about things that he knew about, whether intuitively or otherwise. But that's my grandfather, Joe Neal. And then the next slide will show you a picture of me at my pre-adolescent age, young, probably around 13, 14. And then the next picture of me is at the age of approximately 16. But the first picture was me in the 3rd grade when I remember really having trouble with a teacher that said, "You're different. You're born to challenge." And I was real quiet, and I don't know how she saw that in me, but she made me make me memorize a song called "The Caissons Keep Rolling Along." Over hill, over dale, we've hit the dusty trail, and those caissons keep rolling along. And it was about not quitting. And apparently she knew something about me or about life that I had not encountered at that point. And she also, as a 3rd grader, put me in a spelling bee contest against 8th graders because she said she believed in me and I could do it. So she instilled a lot of confidence in me. And guess what? I became the first runner-up against all the 8th graders. As a 3rd grader, I was really short and small. The next one is when I graduated from high school. And again, I grew up in a community where there was only a handful of African-American kids in the school, in a blue-collar working neighborhood. And yet we had to compete to give the graduation speech. I was one of those competitors, and I was able to give our school graduation speech. And I remember my father being so excited in the stadium. My mother said he wouldn't sit down. He was yelling to everybody, "Look, that's my daughter, that's my daughter." And he was so proud of me having had that opportunity when he himself had not had the opportunity. And again, maybe I was one of those first people who looked like myself to be able to be in that community, standing up with thousands of people in a stadium, giving a speech, your graduation speech. In the next one, you'll see that I did get married, subsequently got married. I feel like I was a real young bride, but I had graduated or was going to graduate from school. And later on, the next image will show you, I married a man in the military, an officer in the Marine Corps, and we moved every 2 to 3 years. So that's when I started, that encapsulation piece for me became very real. It was like, I'm no longer, this is the big world. So every 2 or 3 years, we showed up in a new place. And I saw so much injustice. And I said, wait a minute, this is very similar. Black and brown people are treated very differently in every space that I've shown up in, even in spaces where there were mostly Black and brown people. And so for me, I started seeing the world very differently. And in my next slide, that's when I believe all of the consumption of the world that I had, like a hungry caterpillar, I had taken in very much. And I really sampled the buffet of life, which did start to inform my teaching and learning from a global perspective. And then you couldn't stop me at that point. The next slide, I got my passport and I was all over the world at that point, traveling in and out of places, learning about the world. I didn't need a passport for the next slide because that's in Washington, D.C. So the next slide will show you just me playing around with Washington, D.C. like I'm holding the monument there. And then in the next slide, I'm in England. Next slide, you've seen that from Karen, was in Finland. And you can see that we didn't rehearse our presentations because we're showing similar slides here. Because these were really important moments to me. And it did inform my work, the presentations that I gave to the students there who seemed to really value and appreciate my experience in relationship to theirs, how it differed and how it was similar. And then in the next one, I mean, I'm just hanging out in Jamaica. Yeah, man, I was having a good time there. And then, but yet still learning and still consuming everything that was available to consume. And then the next one is us in Florida. You saw at a conference, I was enjoying the conference and again, learning through the conference presentations and not just the world. The next one, my spouse and I, we went on cruises and we traveled. So now we're in the Bahamas. And the next one is my first teaching kind of experience. I started to teach, and my first teaching experience, in fact, there are so very few teachers of color, women, African Americans. I had different experiences, and I've talked about those in some of my writings. One of those is Entangled Social Realities that I heard Flavia Bastos reference, in which I was treated very differently. I was hired for being competent, yet I was told, wait a minute, you're very articulate, unlike the rest. One administrator had a 6-foot Confederate flag behind his desk. Another one painted their face in blackface and walked down the hallway and was offended that I spoke out. So that was social justice. I wrote a letter and said how offended I was. There were 3 African-American faculty between 2 schools. I was an itinerant, and he was offended. He yelled and threw books at the other 2, and they warned me before I got there that he'll likely do the same to me. And I was prepared to lose my job that day. However, this administrator never brought up the issue to me. He knew I had spearheaded it, and he knew I was not afraid. And whether that's a fault or not, but I was not afraid. And then the next one too is in my early teaching days, where I stand up for people who could not speak for themselves or who would not speak for themselves. So all along, this work came to me. I didn't ask for it. After several years of marriage and teaching, the next slide are my 2 kids that I have, Francesca and Mark. They are 23 months apart, the love of my life. And then the next one is us as a family when the kids were young, followed by the next slide of them as they got older, Francesca and Mark. Francesca is a teacher who had similar experiences as a woman of color. So again, as I'm consuming, I'm watching her. And now she has 2 beautiful young Black women who have experienced similar things. And I keep thinking about my age in relationship to hers, and now grandchildren who are experiencing some of these same issues. They still live with us. And then My son, whom I'll show you later, has a daughter also. And no doubt we have those experiences. Now, I have an African gray next, Dodo, so she's also part of the family. I've had her for 24 years. She's next in the next slide. So she's peeking out of her cage, and you know, she hangs around and she talks very well and speaks and sings and laughs just like a human being. So with that said, the next one, I had 2 experiences that led me to where I am today. 2 experiences, and that was teaching in Georgia and also in Mount Clemens, Michigan. I taught at Erie Elementary School, where I was the only African-American teacher in the entire district. So I was stopped by the police every day. Students cried. They thought I was going to hurt them when the door closed. I spent several days just talking about who I am and just letting them ask questions about me. The parents showed up just like a petting zoo, about 400 to 500 parents on Meet the Teacher night. They didn't go to their regular teacher's room. They came to see the art teacher and if she could be intelligent enough to teach their kinds of kids. So I remember each time my teacher, Dr. Brown, said to me, you know, we have smart people, we have wealthy people, but they're also very ignorant to others. And same thing with Mr. Fight. And both of them encouraged me, you must become an administrator so that you can make a greater impact. I love being a teacher, but they told me, and this came to me, I didn't ask for it, to be an administrator. That was in Georgia. When I moved to Michigan, I was told by this administrator, I think you should become an administrator so you can have a greater impact. So next, I started to reflect upon it. At that stage of reflection, I did a lot of deep reflections. And at that point, I decided maybe I should. The information I consumed while in college and in other places forced me to step back periodically and reflect upon these experiences that I continue to have no matter where I showed up, and to determine how they applied to my life and how I might lead social change as an art teacher and an administrator. So I took the deep dive, and my first experience as administrator. In the next one slide, I found a card where I was recruited as a PhD student at Ohio State University to be administrator. That had a failed search after 61 people, and they asked me to please consider the position. I said no, and then they came back with another search, and I got into the pool and ultimately ended up being the individual who received that position. So I'll go through these even more quickly so I can get to the meat of what I'm saying. The next one is when I got my PhD from the Ohio State University. And then I became a professor at, and I was a principal for a while, but I became a professor at Penn State. And as you all know, those of you who know my work, most of my leadership and work, it takes the form of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And then the next stage was transformation for me. And now these didn't happen necessarily in that sequential order, but they have happened. And this is what has informed me. And the next slide shows you my current family, all grown up. There's my daughter and her 2 lovely young ladies, Layla and Alyssa. The taller one is Layla, who's older. She's now 13, and Alyssa is 10. Francesca's husband, Leland. And then my son, Mark, who's a law enforcement officer. I mentioned Francesca is a teacher. And Angela was one of my former students, who is now an art educator in Columbus, Ohio, where my son serves. And then my spouse to your right. And they now have my son and his wife, after several years of marriage, have a next slide is a beautiful little girl named Sienna. And that's me holding her minutes after she was born. And then the next slide is Sienna 2 days later. Now I saw pictures of her the other day. She's scooting and trying to move across the floor a bit. So with that said, I felt like then the next slide is that we have to be the change that we want to see in the world. And that's what I sought to be, is a change in the world. So all of my publications, my work, my research, as you all are aware, we're having Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Task Force that I led. I was a catalyst for that initiative. I stepped out on the stage in New York in 2015. I talked about racism and discrimination. in NAEA, it was pretty upsetting and discombobulating for some of our art educators, yet it needed to be said. And that came from my research in the Penn State NAEA archives, or the NAEA archives that are housed at Penn State. So after several weeks of going through those archives, I presented information that was irrefutable. And as a consequence, I started working with Dr. Deborah, my former executive director, Dr. Deborah Reed. And then we started talking about what needed to be done to make changes, as opposed to bury our heads and pretend it doesn't exist. And that's when the task force came into play that I chaired as a consequence. And we made this initiative a priority, working with the board, training the board, writings, working with state leaders and others to bring about change. And as Karen showed earlier, it requires everybody, you know, hand in hand, working together. It requires discourse. And that's what, in that bridging communities, bridging racial divides, we have to talk about it, and we have to, no matter how uncomfortable it is, we have to talk about these topics and make them a priority in our work. So this is difficult work, no doubt, but it's work that has to be done. So what I'd like to do in the last few slides that I have is to share with you some insights for developing an ability to address social injustice. And I'd like to start with the notion of passion. Obviously, I have passion for the work that I do. So passion for social justice should fuel our leadership as art educators. It is our responsibility to acquire the knowledge, the skills, and the dispositions necessary to transform unequal educational situations and structures into different settings for teaching and learning. So we must have passion. Next, I believe we must have beliefs. Our leadership and our teaching reflects our worldview. As art educators, we bring values, beliefs, and assumptions to our work. It's really critical that we examine those for implicit bias, among other things. Our personal beliefs concerning social justice will determine whether we lead with an eye toward social justice. In the next one, I believe that we have to consider curriculum. Teachers are gatekeepers of the curriculum. Each act of teaching and leadership is political. I oftentimes hear people say, I don't want to be political, I just want to do art. Well, that is political. So if you are a teacher who is not just an art teacher, but you are a just art teacher, we can think about how we exercise political choice when we incorporate social justice issues into our lessons. Likewise, we use political choice when we avoid topics of social justice in the curriculum. In each case, we have made a subconscious judgment about the value of equity and social justice. In the next one, I want us to think about change. Change is unavoidable. I think about where we are now with COVID-19 a month ago. This is a very different world in just such a short period of time. But in general, change is unavoidable. And nobody likes change except a wet baby. Therefore, it's best to affect change as change makers rather than let change affect us as change takers. And I want us to think about success and failure. Some people are afraid to take on topics of social justice because they're afraid of failure. I might fail. Well, I don't look at failure as being failure. I see failure as feedback. When leading for social justice, we art educators must give ourselves permission to fail in order to succeed, because failure is feedback. As babies, we learn to walk by falling with each failure, by falling. And then with each failure, when we fail, we were one step closer to reaching our goal. And the next one, think about perseverance. These are difficult times and times of uncertainty. To persevere is to keep trying. It is better to try and fail rather than fail to try to affect change for social justice. Determination and persistent effort leads to success. And then I want us to think about social networking. In this time, particularly when and we have been encouraged and really mandated that we look at social distancing. That's a fracture. How do we come back together? We need to come back together so that social networking, and I'm so pleased and honored that we continued with this conference or these presentations despite the conference being canceled. So we still came up with a new way to connect. We need to stay connected because isolation can hinder our efforts. It is valuable for art teachers to stay really energized by developing supportive social networks with like-minded progressive educators who have oftentimes oriented their work towards social change and social justice. So, and then the last one I'm going to look at is responsibility. As leaders, we have a tremendous responsibility, no doubt you know that, as educators. However, our responsibility goes beyond just teaching. We have a responsibility to be agents of change for social justice in our classrooms and other workspaces. Anything less, we deny learners opportunities to study past and present social justice movements that might offer inspiration that schools and societies can change for the better. 2, we deny youth opportunities to advocate for change. And we model apathy in reaction to global issues and concerns. I want to show next people in my life. This is no doubt Karen Keifer-Boyd, who has, she's gotten many, many awards, and this is one of those times in which she was getting this award. She's been very instrumental in my life and also a big mentor. And so this was a joyful opportunity for me to celebrate with her on one of her many, many awards. So again, a great friend, a mentor, a great colleague, another advocate for social justice, staunch supporter of equal rights for all people. And I'm so honored to know her like other colleagues. And then Karen has shared with you Deborah Reeve, whom I also call my sister like Karen Keifer-Boyd, because acting as an agent of change for social justice requires deep personal commitment, and it requires confidence that change is possible. And these people have worked toward change, so they no doubt know that change is possible. And this is why I'm so close to these individuals, because they have stepped out to make change in various ways. In the next slide, you know, you said Wanda Knight says, burn it down. Well, I think Dr. June King McFee would agree with me that when we fan the flames of social justice, what will emerge from the ashes will be conditions far better than those that currently exist. Now, in saying that, I did not have the opportunity to spend much time with Dr. June King McFee, but I was in her presence from time to time. I see her as a role model. My diverse leadership experiences oriented towards social justice and my sustained contributions to art education over the span of now 40 years. They embody the legacy of Dr. June King McFee. As such, I'm humble and I really appreciate this opportunity to share my journey with you toward transformation as a social justice leader. And I am honored to be the recipient of the June King McFee 2020 award by the Women's Caucus. And then the next slide, Wakanda. So best wishes and thank you so much. Again, the transformation, and I hope to continue to grow and transform to even greater heights. Thank you all so much.
Oh, thank you, Wanda. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Is it Gloria Wilson's?
I have Manisha's speech for Gloria.
Great. Please. Share.
Okay. So this is Manisha's words. Good morning, everyone. I apologize for not joining you all to honor the inspiring scholars, educators, and feminists among us today. My physical and virtual absence, however, does not diminish the pride and joy I feel to be part of this community, which is meeting despite the strange circumstances we find ourselves in. I am doubly overjoyed by this event this year, as I get to work with not one, but two of the women being honored in recognition of their contributions as feminist art educators today. And it is my pleasure and privilege to give an introduction to Gloria Wilson, recipient of the Mary J. Rouse Award this year. 2 years before I actually had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Gloria Wilson in person, I had heard about her from other colleagues and friends in the field. I had heard about her compassionate nature, her dedication to her students, her diligence as a colleague and collaborator, and the sharpness of her scholarship. As I started following her work, I got to know the thoughtful activist bent of her scholarship. Once I met her, these strong impressions of her were not only confirmed, but compounded as I got to know and appreciate her wry sense of humor, her innate sense of style, and her empathetic sensitivity as a good human being. As a scholar whose research highlights the intersection of racial identity and the necessity for sustained provision of arts participation and equity within arts and education, I find it highly appropriate that Dr. Wilson receives the Mary J. Rouse Award. Gloria has served as an art educator for 20 years, 13 of which were spent in secondary 7th through 12th grade urban and rural learning environments. The pertinence of her research on the widening of an achievement gap in K through 12 environments, which greatly disadvantage Latinx and Black American youth, is evident in the growing focus in educational institutions on equity and inclusion. Gloria's research is significant in that it emphasizes the criticality of addressing the imbalance between cultural competencies of pre-service teachers and those of students on the lower registers of the achievement gap. She offers, as a solution, the benefits of forging interpersonal relationships which make an impact on the engagement of students from minoritized communities. The growing impact of her work is recognized by her students, one of whom applauds Dr. Wilson for her level of attentiveness that she has observed her exert in her research, and says that her practice reflects a level of excellence that the student herself strives to achieve in her own work. The same student says, quote, "I feel as though my abilities as an emerging scholar and researcher has grown because of the imprint of her own work and mentorship. Moreover, her scholarship, for instance, merely within the past year has helped to shape my knowledge around visual culture / art education and qualitative methods and methodology," end quote. Dr. Wilson's colleagues note that she is making an indelible mark in our field, especially through her ethnographic research on the multiple identities of art educators of color. She has been prolific in her publications. Since earning her PhD in 2014, she has published 12 refereed journal articles, a book chapter in the Palgrave Handbook on Race and the Arts in Education, and has over 5 publications in the works, 2 of which are anthologies she is co-editing. In addition, she has been widely in demand as a guest speaker in academic arts venues nationally and internationally, including in Egypt, Jamaica, and Korea. As Dr. Pam Lawton notes, quote, "This is an impressive record for an established art education professional and an extraordinary record of scholarship for an emerging scholar," end quote. She also has the distinction of being a Fulbright scholar. Dr. Wilson's increasing visibility and impact in the field is also evident in her service to the field at national levels. In keeping with her professional philosophy, she has chosen to be the chair for the NAEA Pre-Service Division for the Professional Learning Through Research Group and a member of the NAEA National Task Force on Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. This is only the tip of the iceberg of her service commitments, but all of them indicate her impact in strengthening and developing our art education community at local and national levels. I count myself as very fortunate to get to work with Gloria as a colleague and to witness her excellent teaching and research practices. I am impressed by her insights and theoretical approaches, as well as the constructive comments and feedback, including how to refine research ideas and approach contemporary research methodologies. I always enjoy her presentations at the many conferences and symposia she presents at. To the students at the University of Arizona, her compassionate mentorship and pedagogy, as well as her arts-based practice embodied in her recent work, #Blackademic, helped create an ideal classroom environment to address contemporary art education issues such as race, identity, power, and ideological exploration. Congratulations on this award, Gloria, and thank you for this opportunity, Mary, to introduce her at this forum today. Sincerely, Manisha Sharma.
Thank you, Carrisa. We